The autumn sun cast long shadows across Buckingham Palace gardens as Tom Parker Bowles adjusted his tie nervously. He had requested this meeting weeks ago, and, now that the moment had arrived, his hands trembled slightly as he walked through the ornate corridors he had known since childhood. The palace staff moved quietly around him, their expressions carefully neutral, though he could sense the tension in the air. Tom had always occupied a unique position within the royal family. As Camilla's son from her first marriage, he existed in a delicate space between private citizen and royal adjacent. For years, he had maintained a respectful distance from royal affairs, content with his career as a food critic and author. But recent events had changed everything. The coronation of King Charles III had elevated his mother to Queen Consort, a title that brought with it immense responsibility and scrutiny. Tom had watched as she navigated her new role with grace, but he had also seen the toll it took on her. The constant pressure, the unrelenting public attention, and the weight of history had aged her visibly in just a few months. It was during a private dinner at Highgrove House that Tom first broached the subject with his mother. They sat in the intimate dining room, just the two of them, as they had done countless times before. But, this time, the conversation took an unexpected turn. "Mother, I've been thinking," Tom began carefully, setting down his wineglass. "About my position, about our family's role in all of this." Camilla looked at him with those knowing eyes that had guided him through life's challenges. "What's troubling you, darling?" "I want to do more," he said, the words tumbling out faster than he intended. "I want to support you properly, to take on some official duties. I know I'm not a working royal, but surely there's something." The Queen Consort's expression shifted subtly, a mix of maternal pride and concern crossing her features. "Tom, you know how complicated these matters are. The protocols, the precedents." "But times are changing," Tom insisted. "The monarchy needs to modernize, to be more inclusive. I'm your son. Doesn't that count for something?" The conversation had continued late into the night, with Camilla promising to consider his proposal carefully. What Tom didn't know was that she would take his request directly to the king, setting in motion a chain of events that would shake the very foundations of the palace hierarchy. News of Tom's ambitions reached Prince William through unofficial channels first. A trusted aide had overheard a conversation between senior courtiers discussing the Parker Bowles situation, as it was being delicately termed. William's reaction was immediate and visceral. He stood in his office at Kensington Palace, gazing out at the manicured gardens where his children often played. The thought of Tom Parker Bowles assuming any official royal role struck him as not just inappropriate, but potentially dangerous to the institution he would one day lead. William had nothing personal against Tom. In fact, he had always found him pleasant enough during their limited interactions at family gatherings. But this was about something far greater than personal feelings. This was about the future of the monarchy, about maintaining the delicate balance that kept the institution relevant and respected in modern Britain. The Prince of Wales immediately called for a meeting with his private secretary. "I need to know everything," he said, his voice carrying the authority of his position. Every conversation, every proposal, every possibility being discussed regarding Tom Parker Bowles and any potential royal role. As the days passed, the tension within palace walls grew palpable. Courtiers found themselves choosing sides, though none dared voice their opinions openly. Some saw Tom's request as a reasonable evolution of the modern monarchy, a way to broaden its appeal and show that the royal family could adapt to changing times. Others, particularly those aligned with William, viewed it as a dangerous precedent that could open the floodgates to all manner of complications. Tom, meanwhile, found himself in an increasingly uncomfortable position. Word of his ambitions had somehow leaked beyond palace walls, and the media was beginning to circle. Photographers appeared outside his London home, and journalists called his office seeking comment. He maintained a dignified silence, but, inside, he felt the weight of scrutiny he had never experienced before. The situation reached a critical point when Tom received a formal invitation to meet with senior palace officials. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon, in one of the palace's most formal conference rooms. Tom arrived early, his usual confidence somewhat diminished by the gravity of the situation. The room was already occupied when he entered. 3 senior courtiers sat at the polished mahogany table, their faces masks of professional neutrality. But it was the fourth figure that made Tom's breath catch in his throat. Prince William sat at the head of the table, his posture rigid, his blue eyes cold as winter frost. "Tom," William said, his voice carrying neither warmth nor hostility, just a clinical detachment that was somehow worse than anger. "Please, sit down. We have much to discuss." Tom took his seat, acutely aware that this was not the friendly, supportive meeting he had hoped for. The Prince of Wales had come to deliver a message, and Tom suspected he would not like what he was about to hear. "I understand you've expressed interest in taking on a more formal role within the royal family," William began, his words measured and precise. "While we appreciate your desire to support Her Majesty, your mother, I'm afraid we need to discuss the realities of such a proposition." The senior courtiers shifted slightly in their seats, clearly uncomfortable with the tension filling the room. Tom straightened his spine, drawing on reserves of courage he didn't know he possessed. "Your Royal Highness," Tom began, pleased that his voice remained steady. "I simply want to serve. My mother carries an enormous burden, and I believe I could help ease that load." William's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "The burden of the crown is not one that can be shared lightly, Tom. It requires not just willingness, but legitimacy. You must understand that." The word hung in the air between them, legitimacy. Tom felt its weight, its implication. He was not royal by blood, not born to this world of titles and protocols. He was, in the strictest sense, an outsider who had been brought inside through his mother's marriage. "I'm not seeking a title," Tom said carefully. "I'm not asking to be made a prince. I simply want to undertake some charitable work, to represent my mother at certain events when she cannot attend." One of the senior courtiers cleared his throat. "Mr. Parker Bowles, you must understand that any official representation of the royal family carries with it certain implications. The public would naturally assume." "The public would assume that the monarchy is evolving," Tom interrupted, surprising himself with his boldness. "That we're becoming more inclusive, more representative of modern British families." William leaned forward slightly, his gaze intensifying. "Or they might assume that we're diluting the very essence of what makes the monarchy special. That we're opening doors that should remain closed." The meeting continued for another hour, with positions hardening on both sides. Tom argued passionately for a modest role, perhaps focusing on food security charities given his background. The courtiers presented various constitutional and practical obstacles. But it was William who delivered the final word. "Tom, I want to be absolutely clear," the Prince of Wales said as the meeting drew to a close. "Any decision regarding your potential involvement in royal duties would need to be carefully considered at the highest levels. This is not a decision that can be made lightly or quickly. And I would strongly advise you to consider whether pursuing this path is truly in your best interests, or your mother's." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Tom felt the chill of it settle over him like a shroud. He looked into William's eyes and saw not the future king's wisdom, but the protective instincts of a man defending his birthright. As Tom left the palace that day, he felt the weight of centuries of tradition pressing down upon him. The gardens that had seemed so welcoming when he arrived now felt like a maze from which he couldn't escape. He had made his request, stated his case, and been met with a wall of ice. But Tom Parker Bowles was his mother's son, and if there was one thing Camilla had taught him, it was resilience. As he walked through the palace gates and into the London afternoon, he made a decision. He would not give up. Not yet. The battle lines had been drawn. On one side stood Tom, supported quietly by his mother and a growing faction of modernizers within the palace. On the other stood William, defender of tradition and guardian of the monarchy's future. Between them lay a chasm of competing visions for what the royal family should become. What none of them knew was that this was only the beginning. The true confrontation was yet to come, and, when it arrived, it would test not just the relationship between Tom and William, but the very foundations of the monarchy itself. The palace had been stunned by Tom's demands, but William's icy response had only raised the stakes. In the coming weeks, alliances would shift, secrets would be revealed, and the facade of royal unity would be tested as never before. The weeks following the confrontation saw Buckingham Palace transformed into a battlefield of whispers and carefully orchestrated maneuvers. Tom Parker Bowles found himself at the center of a storm he had never intended to create, while Prince William marshaled his resources with the precision of a military commander. The first salvo came from an unexpected quarter. Lady Sarah Chatto, Princess Margaret's daughter and a woman who had successfully navigated life on the periphery of royalty, requested a private meeting with Tom. They met at a discreet members' club in Mayfair, away from prying eyes and eager photographers. "Tom," she began, stirring her tea with deliberate calm, "I understand what you're trying to do, and, in many ways, I admire your intentions. But, you need to understand the complexities you're dealing with." Tom leaned back in his chair, studying this woman who had managed to maintain both her royal connections and her independence. "I'm beginning to realize that," he admitted. "But surely there must be a way forward that doesn't involve complete capitulation." Sarah's smile was knowing and slightly sad. "The monarchy is like a delicate ecosystem, Tom. Every change, no matter how small, has ripple effects. William understands this perhaps better than anyone. He's not being cruel, he's being protective." "Protective of what exactly?" Tom asked, unable to keep the frustration from his voice. "His future throne? His children's inheritance?" "Protective of an institution that has survived for over 1,000 years, Sarah replied. "An institution that your mother is now part of, whether you like it or not. Your actions affect her position too." This was the aspect that troubled Tom most. In the days following his meeting with William, he had noticed subtle changes in his mother's demeanor. Camilla remained supportive in private, but, in public, she had begun to distance herself slightly, as if creating a buffer between her royal duties and her son's ambitions. King Charles, meanwhile, found himself caught in an impossible position. In private conversations with Camilla, he expressed sympathy for Tom's desire to serve. The king had always believed in modernizing the monarchy, in making it more accessible and relevant to contemporary Britain. But he also understood William's concerns, and, more importantly, he knew that William represented the future. The tension reached new heights during a state dinner for the Norwegian royal family. Tom had not been invited, a deliberate omission that spoke volumes. But his absence became a presence unto itself when a senior Norwegian diplomat innocently asked Camilla about her children during the reception. William, standing nearby, watched as his stepmother navigated the question with practiced diplomacy. But he also caught the flash of pain in her eyes, the mother's hurt at having to compartmentalize her love for her son. Later that evening, after the formal dinner had concluded, William found himself alone with his father in the king's private study. The room, with its rich wood paneling and portraits of previous monarchs, seemed to press the weight of history upon both men. "This situation with Tom needs to be resolved," Charles said, his voice weary. "It's becoming a distraction." William stood by the window, his reflection ghost-like in the ancient glass. "There's nothing to resolve, Papa." "The answer is no." "It has to be no." "Does it?" Charles asked, moving to pour himself a measure of whiskey. "Times change, William. The monarchy must evolve or risk becoming irrelevant." "Evolution and revolution are not the same thing," William countered. "What Tom is asking for would set a precedent we cannot afford. Today it's him, tomorrow it could be any number of peripheral relatives claiming a right to represent the crown." Charles sighed deeply, suddenly, looking every one of his years. "And what of Camilla? She's torn between her son and her duty." "She made her choice when she married you," William said, his voice softer now but no less firm. "We all make sacrifices for the crown. That's what it means to be royal." The conversation continued late into the night, father and son debating the future of the institution they both served. Neither gave ground, and both left with the growing realization that this crisis was far from over. Tom, meanwhile, was discovering that his ambitions had awakened forces beyond the palace walls. The media, sensing blood in the water, had begun to dig into every aspect of his life. Old relationships were scrutinized, business dealings examined, and even his children found themselves followed by photographers on their way to school. It was this last intrusion that finally prompted Tom to take drastic action. He arranged another meeting with William, this time on neutral ground, a private room at White's, the gentlemen's club where both were members. William arrived precisely on time, his protection officers discreetly positioning themselves outside. Tom was already waiting, nursing a brandy and staring into the fireplace. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," Tom began as William took his seat. "You said it was urgent," William replied, his tone still formal but perhaps a fraction less icy than before. "My children are being harassed," Tom said bluntly. "Photographers outside their school, journalists calling their friends' parents. This has to stop." For the first time since the crisis began, William's expression showed genuine concern. Whatever his feelings about Tom's ambitions, children were innocents in this game. "I'll have a word with our press office," William said after a moment. "We can't control the media entirely, but we can make it clear that your children are off limits." "Thank you," Tom said, meaning it. "But this brings me to a larger point. This situation is untenable. We need to find a resolution." William studied the man across from him. Tom Parker Bowles was not what he had expected. There was no arrogance here, no grasping ambition. Just a man trying to find his place in an increasingly complicated world. "What do you really want, Tom?" William asked, surprising himself with the question. "Not what you think you should want, or what others expect. What do you actually want?" Tom was quiet for a long moment, considering. "I want to make my mother proud," he finally said. "I want to contribute something meaningful. And, yes, I suppose I want to belong somewhere." "You do belong," William said, his tone gentler than it had been in weeks. "You're Camilla's son. That makes you family." "But being family and being a working royal are two very different things." "I'm beginning to understand that," Tom admitted. "But there must be some middle ground. Some way I can support my mother without threatening the institutional integrity you're so keen to protect." William leaned back in his chair, considering. For the first time since this crisis began, he allowed himself to see Tom not as a threat, but as a man caught between worlds, much as William himself often felt caught between his public duty and private desires. "There might be a way," William said slowly, as if testing the words. "Not what you originally asked for, but something that might satisfy everyone's needs." Tom leaned forward, hope flickering in his eyes for the first time in weeks. "Continue your work as you have been," William continued. "Your food writing, your charitable activities. But we could formalize some of your charitable patronages, give them a royal connection without making you a working royal. You would be supporting causes close to your mother's heart, but in your own capacity." "And the palace would acknowledge this?" Tom asked carefully. "Discreetly," William said. "No formal announcements, no change in your status. But the charities you support would benefit from the association, and you would be making a meaningful contribution." It wasn't what Tom had originally envisioned, but as he considered the proposal, he began to see its merits. He would maintain his independence while still being able to support his mother's work. Most importantly, it would end this destructive conflict that was tearing at the fabric of the family. "I need to think about it," Tom said finally. "Of course," William replied, standing. "But, Tom, understand this offer comes with conditions. Absolute discretion, no speaking to the media about royal matters, and a clear understanding that this doesn't lead to anything more." Tom stood as well, extending his hand. "I understand." William hesitated for just a moment before taking the offered hand. The handshake was firm, a seal on their tentative accord. As they left the club separately, neither man noticed the figure watching from a corner table. A senior courtier, one of the old guard who had served the late Queen Elizabeth, made a discreet phone call. "It's done," he said quietly. "They've reached an understanding. But I fear this is far from over. The younger generation may accept this compromise, but there are others who will not be so accommodating. Indeed, as news of the meeting filtered through the palace hierarchy, reactions were mixed. Some breathed sighs of relief that the immediate crisis had been averted. Others, particularly among the traditionalists, saw it as the thin edge of the wedge, a dangerous compromise that would only lead to further erosion of royal protocol. Camilla, when informed of the development by her husband, felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that her son would no longer be at odds with William, pride that both men had shown maturity in finding a solution, but also a lingering sadness that such negotiations had been necessary at all. "Are you satisfied with this outcome?" Charles asked her as they walked through the private gardens of Highgrove. "I'm a mother," Camilla replied simply. "I wanted my son to be happy. If this brings him peace, then, yes, I'm satisfied." But, even as she spoke the words, both knew that peace in the royal family was always temporary. The compromise between William and Tom had addressed the immediate crisis, but it had also exposed deeper fault lines within the institution. The modernizers saw it as a positive step, proof that the monarchy could adapt without losing its essential character. The traditionalists saw it as a dangerous precedent, a crack in the wall that would inevitably widen. And, somewhere in between stood the principal players, Tom, trying to navigate his new understanding with William, wondering if he had shown wisdom or weakness, and Camilla, the queen consort whose love for her son had inadvertently triggered a crisis that would have lasting repercussions. The palace had been stunned by the initial confrontation, but the resolution had created new tensions that would simmer beneath the surface. The ice had thawed between William and Tom, but other relationships within the royal household had been fundamentally altered. As autumn turned to winter, an uneasy peace settled over the palace. But those who knew the institution best understood that this was merely an interlude. The questions raised by Tom's ambitions, about belonging, legitimacy, and the future of the monarchy itself, remained unanswered. The fragile peace that had settled over Buckingham Palace lasted exactly 47 days. It shattered on a cold December morning when a leak to a prominent newspaper revealed the details of the private arrangement between Prince William and Tom Parker Bowles. The headline screamed across the front page, "Secret deal, future king's pact with Camilla's son rocks palace." Tom woke to find his phone buzzing incessantly. Messages from friends, journalists, and, most alarmingly, from the palace communications office flooded in. His hands shook as he read the article, which contained details that only someone present at their private meetings could have known. At Kensington Palace, William's rage was incandescent. He stood in his office, the newspaper crumpled in his fist, while his private secretary maintained a careful distance. "Find out who did this," William said, his voice deadly quiet. "I want to know who leaked this, and I want to know by the end of the day." The investigation that followed would reveal uncomfortable truths about divisions within the palace staff itself. Some had never accepted Camilla's elevation to queen consort, and, by extension, viewed any accommodation of her son as a betrayal of the late Queen Elizabeth's legacy. But the immediate concern was damage control. The leak had not only exposed the arrangement but had characterized it in the worst possible light, suggesting that Tom had somehow manipulated or pressured William into the agreement. An emergency meeting was convened at Clarence House. Present were King Charles, Queen Camilla, Prince William, and, after some debate, Tom himself. The atmosphere in the room was arctic. "This is exactly what I feared," William said, not bothering with pleasantries. "This is why I was against any arrangement from the beginning. Now we have a crisis that makes the original situation look like a minor disagreement." Tom, for his part, looked genuinely stricken. "Your Royal Highness, I assure you, I had nothing to do with this leak. It damages me as much as anyone." "Does it?" William shot back. "The article portrays you as a victim, as someone who was initially rebuffed but eventually won a concession through persistence." "How convenient." William, King Charles intervened, his voice carrying the authority of his position. "Accusations without evidence help no one. We need to focus on managing this situation." Camilla had remained silent throughout the exchange, but now she spoke, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "Perhaps the solution is for Tom to publicly withdraw from any royal-adjacent activities. Make it clear that there is no arrangement, no special treatment." "Mother, no," Tom protested. That would be giving in to whoever orchestrated this leak. They want to drive a wedge between us, to force me out entirely. And maybe that's exactly what should happen, William said coldly. This entire episode has been a distraction from the real work of the monarchy. Perhaps it's time to acknowledge that some bridges are too far to cross. The meeting continued for hours, with positions hardening rather than softening. Charles attempted to mediate, but the fundamental conflict remained unresolved. William saw the leak as vindication of his initial position, while Tom felt betrayed by an institution he had tried to serve. In the days that followed, the media frenzy intensified. Old photos of Tom at royal events were analyzed for signs of ambition. His business relationships were scrutinized for any hint of trading on royal connections. Even his ex-wife was approached for comment, though she maintained a dignified silence. It was Catherine, Princess of Wales, who ultimately provided an unexpected perspective. She had largely stayed out of the conflict, supporting her husband privately while maintaining cordial relations with Camilla. But, as the crisis deepened, she requested a private meeting with William. "This is destroying us from within," she told her husband as they walked through their private garden, away from listening ears. "Not Tom, not the leak, but our response to it. We're so focused on protecting the institution that we're forgetting the human cost." William stopped walking, turning to face his wife. "What would you have me do? Embrace him as a working royal? Set a precedent that anyone who marries into the family can bring their entire extended network into the fold?" "I'm not saying that," Catherine replied gently. "But I am saying that perhaps there's a difference between protecting the institution and becoming so rigid that we break rather than bend. Your grandmother understood that. She knew when to stand firm and when to show flexibility." "My grandmother never had to deal with a situation like this," William said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. "Didn't she?" Catherine asked. "What about when your father married Camilla? Many said it would destroy the monarchy, that the public would never accept her. But, through patience and dignity, she won them over. Perhaps Tom deserves the same chance." That evening, an unexpected visitor arrived at Tom's London home. Princess Anne, the king's sister and someone who had always been known for her no-nonsense approach to royal duty, had requested a private word. "I'm not here to take sides," Anne said bluntly as she sat in Tom's living room, declining his offer of tea. "But I am here to offer some advice, based on decades of experience." Tom listened as Anne spoke about the delicate balance required of those who existed on the periphery of royalty. She talked about her own children, who had been raised without titles, and how they had found fulfilling lives outside the royal spotlight while still supporting the family when needed. "The mistake you made," Anne said with characteristic directness, "was in formalizing something that should have remained informal. The moment you asked for recognition, you changed the dynamic. The royal family has always operated on unspoken understandings. When you make them spoken, you create problems. So what do I do now?" Tom asked, genuinely seeking guidance. "You step back," Anne said simply. "Not forever, but for now. Let this storm pass. Continue your charitable work, support your mother privately, and, in time, people will forget this controversy. The media will move on to the next scandal, and you can quietly resume a supportive role without fanfare." It was pragmatic advice, delivered without sentiment but not without kindness. Tom found himself grateful for Anne's intervention, seeing in her a model for how to navigate the complexities of royal-adjacent life. The next morning brought another surprise. William's office contacted Tom directly, requesting a final meeting. This time, it would be just the two of them, no advisors, no courtiers, just two men trying to find a way forward. They met at Highgrove, in Charles's study, though the king himself was absent. The choice of venue was deliberate, neutral ground where both could speak freely. "I owe you an apology," William began, surprising Tom into silence. "Not for my position, I still believe I was right to be cautious. But, for the way I've handled this. Catherine reminded me that we're not just institutions, we're people. And, I've treated you as a problem to be solved rather than as family." Tom found himself unexpectedly moved by the admission. "I appreciate that, William. And I owe you an apology too. I was naive about what I was asking for, about the complexities involved. I let my desire to help my mother blind me to the bigger picture. Your mother is lucky to have a son who wants to support her, William said. And I understand that impulse. If the situation were reversed, I'd want to do the same for my father. The two men talked for another hour, not about formal arrangements or royal protocols, but about family, duty, and the challenges of living in the public eye. By the end, they had reached not so much an agreement as an understanding. Tom would step back from any formal royal activities for the foreseeable future. He would continue his charitable work but without seeking palace endorsement. In return, William would ensure that Tom and his family were protected from media harassment and that Camilla would never be put in a position of having to choose between her royal duties and her maternal instincts. There may come a time, William said as they prepared to part, when the monarchy has evolved enough that someone in your position could play a more formal role. But that time is not now. I understand, Tom said. And I accept that. My mother's happiness and the stability of the institution she serves are more important than my personal ambitions. As they shook hands, both men felt a weight lifting. The crisis had not been resolved in the way either had initially envisioned, but perhaps it had been resolved in the way it needed to be. The weeks that followed saw a gradual return to normalcy. The media, deprived of new fuel for the fire, moved on to other stories. Tom returned to his writing and his quiet charitable work. Camilla, freed from the tension of being pulled between competing loyalties, threw herself into her royal duties with renewed energy. But the episode had changed things fundamentally. William had learned valuable lessons about flexibility and the human cost of rigid adherence to protocol. Tom had gained a deeper appreciation for the complexities of the institution his mother had married into. And the monarchy itself had been forced to confront questions about its future evolution. In a private moment between mother and son, Camilla took Tom's hands in hers. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. "Not for what you tried to do, but for how you've handled yourself throughout this difficult time." "I just wanted to make things easier for you," Tom replied. "I know, darling. But sometimes the best way to support someone is to step back and let them carry their own burdens. That's what being royal means, carrying burdens with grace." As the winter deepened and the palace prepared for the Christmas season, there was a sense that a chapter had closed. The crisis that had begun with Tom's ambitions and William's icy response had ultimately strengthened the family's understanding of itself. The palace had indeed been stunned by the events of recent months, but from that shock had come growth. The monarchy had bent without breaking, had shown both its resilience and its capacity for evolution, even if that evolution came more slowly than some might wish. In years to come, historians would look back on this episode as a turning point, not because it had changed everything, but because it had shown that change itself was possible, even within an institution built on tradition. The ice between William and Tom had melted, replaced by a mutual respect born of honest confrontation and ultimate reconciliation. The royal family moved forward, forever changed by the crisis but perhaps stronger for having weathered it. Tom Parker Bowles had not become a working royal, but he had become something perhaps more valuable, a symbol of how the monarchy could embrace its extended family while maintaining its essential character. As snow began to fall on London, blanketing the palace grounds in pristine white, there was a sense of peace that had been absent for months. The storm had passed, leaving in its wake a clearer understanding of what it meant to be royal, to be family, and to find one's place in an ever-evolving institution.